Mark Carney and the Liberals have won a fourth term, will form the next government, albeit with what appears to be a minority mandate at a time of a lot of uncertainty. Here to break down what it all means for Canada's economy is Francis Fong, senior economist at TD. Francis, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Greg.
Interesting as always, when we see results from an election, we see a mandate now for Prime Minister Carney. What kind of economic impact do you see from these results?
Yeah, so we already had baked in quite a bit of economic stimulus or fiscal stimulus coming from government, whatever that might be, as a consequence of higher revenues coming from tariffs and that's sort of feeding through back into the economy about a percentage point. But what we saw out of the Carney platform was quite a bit more than that. $130 billion in net new spending. It was effectively a miniature budget and what we can probably look forward to when they actually do release the actual formal mandate of this government. So we're anticipating about 1 1/3 percentage points added to growth. But like you said at the start, Greg, we're entering this territory or sort of this uncertain territory with tariffs, with sort of uncertainty around how the actual trade negotiations are going to go, how Trump is going to react to this government winning this mandate. We know he's sort of provoked us in the past. And so there's still a lot of factors to consider. But for the time being, we're still expecting this sort of mandate to sort of lead to quite a bit more net new spending in a lot of different areas, quite a lot of sprinkling around a lot of different sort of key priorities from housing to defense to infrastructure. So all that remains to be seen.
We heard a lot about economic resilience on the campaign trail. What kind of changes do we need to see to our economy to bring us that resilience?
I mean, Greg, what we're really talking about here is sort of reorienting the Canadian economy away from 80 years of north-south orientation to try to create a more east-west orientation. And it's not like Canada has not been down this road before. Like, we have had this conversation many, many times. And up until now, all we've seen is this continued deepening in that relationship because for many reasons, both economic and political, it's just been simpler to do that. So now what we're talking about is transportation infrastructure, energy infrastructure, everything from pipelines to electricity transmission, connecting, cities to each other, connecting hubs to trade routes like ports, rail, air. There's a lot that needs to get done if we're going to see this sort of east-west orientation through. And it's not an easy job either. There's a lot of stakeholders at the table, a lot of competing priorities. Carney has a really big job around trying to actually get consensus around what kind of projects are actually necessary to reorient us in an east-west orientation. And as we can see from the campaign trail, some of those voices aren't necessarily going to buy into his vision immediately. So there's going to be a lot of negotiation happening, even within, sort of that federal, provincial, territorial table that we see a lot of. So again, same deal. We're waiting on those details and to see how those negotiations sort of progress.
So that was a big issue on the campaign. And as you said, it's been a big issue for this country a long time. North-south dependent, looking east and west. Housing, also a big issue. How much progress can we realistically make on boosting housing supply, improving affordability? Because this isn't new either.
It's not. And quite frankly, what Carney has talked about is not new either. He kind of harkens back to, the post-war era when the federal government was more deeply involved and more actively involved in actually building homes. They put together this new Build Canada Homes initiative where they plan on taking modular housing and prefabricated homes and putting them on federal public lands, infill within urban centers, hopefully where there's actually high demand for housing and not in areas that, sort of in the middle of nowhere that folks probably wouldn't be that interested in, given the lack of transit or employment opportunities there. But, we've been down this road before and it worked in the past. Whether it works today is actually sort of an open question. Are people actually interested in prefabricated homes? It represents about one supply of the homes that we actually put up on a year-to-year basis. And we've seen the federal government already put that to work. Like Justin Trudeau had quite a lot of prefabricated homes in the National Housing Strategy that he's implemented implemented over, the previous 10 years. And that's mostly been in sort of supportive housing for underrepresented or marginalized populations, for asylum seekers, shelters, whether that's for those who are unhoused, women's shelters, so on and so forth. And so that's worked in the sense that it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot quicker to put up, and when you need that kind of critical housing, that's been a really good solution. But now we're talking about dealing with a market housing solution, and that's a lot more complicated. People want to be close to transit. They want to be close to their employment opportunities. Is modular housing the preferred kind of housing that people will actually be interested in if the price is right? And are you able to get those prices down? Because at the end of the day, a key part of housing is also the price of land. If you're going to fold in the price of land into this cost of new housing, that's also an open question about whether it remains affordable for people. A lot of jurisdictions like the UK, the Netherlands, they do the same thing about building on public lands, but they actually lease those lands for free to home builders so that the price of land is sort of removed from the equation to ensure it's actually affordable. But those remain public lands, so if they ever sort of stop building on them, they sort of go back to the government. Let's just say that his goal of trying to build 500,000 homes a year is extremely unlikely, simply because we've never gotten there. Like, we haven't even come close to that level of housing construction since I've started my career over almost 20 years ago. So it's hard to see how we'll reach that target, but at least we're trying something new. We're trying something that has worked for us in the past. So I'm excited to see whether this opportunity, sort of reveals itself as being successful. But I have my doubts, of course.
All right, so there's a lot in this file. I feel like I'm asking you everything about Canada and the here and now. I want to ask you about the Canadian dollar. It's been interesting in the past little while. Bit of strength there, of course, courtesy of the U.S. dollar weakness. But now we have what looks like a minority government. We have greater political uncertainty, trade uncertainty. What is your outlook for the loonie?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not as exciting as you might like because we have those countervailing forces. We have the sort of global uncertainty as a result of the U.S.-China trade war. Still unclear how those trade negotiations are going to go, if they'll go at all. How trade negotiations are sort of proceeding with every other individual country that the U.S. is trying to negotiate with. And so that sort of theme of broad dollar weakness is still present. But on the same token, we have this sort of renewed minority government. That's not necessarily been positively received by markets either. Sort of this morning, we've seen a little bit more weakness there. So we sort of have it hovering around where it is. It'll strengthen likely mid-year as we start to see these trade negotiations start to materialize. That's our baseline assumption. But again, a lot of uncertainty, and I think a lot of sort of volatility is going to be the name of the game, just as we're seeing in other markets.